You do. But hey, reach for your Bible, and today we're going to return to the RIV of the book of Jude, and we're going to review just a little bit because it's been several days since we've been together. And today we're going to review beginning in verse 8. And in verse 8, Jude is addressing false leaders, false teachers that have wormed their way into the church. And my friends, not only was this happening in the first century, it is happening again today. In fact, when you read the book of Jude, it seems like such a relevant epistle for the very times in which we are living. And when you come to Jude, verse 8, in the King James Version, Jude says, likewise, also these filthy dreamers, talking about false teachers, defile the flesh, despise dominions, and speak evil of dignities. Now that's very brief in the King James Version. However, the Greek words used in this verse are jam-packed, and when you put all the flavor into the verse, it becomes quite larger. Here's the RIV of verse 8. In the very same identical way, these dreamers have shockingly convinced themselves that what they do and condone is all right. They go about defiling the flesh, and they show total disregard for those in authority. And out of a complete disdain for spiritual authority, they derogatorily speak debasing, nasty, shameful, ugly words toward those in authority who are worthy of honor and respect. And they do it with a purpose of belittling and putting them down. That is the RIV of verse 8. Then we come to verse 9. And in verse 9, the King James Version says, yet Michael, the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses, durst not bring against him a railing accusation, but said, the Lord rebuke thee. The RIV says it like this, I tell you that amazingly, even Michael, the tremendously powerful archangel, at the moment when he was wrangling and going back and forth with the devil in a fierce argument and really hot debate concerning the body of Moses, even he did not dare cross the line and get into judgment. He did not take retribution against the devil or speak insulting and humiliating words to him, but instead simply said, the Lord rebuke you. And here we find that unlike false teachers and false leaders who just rail and accuse everybody, even Michael the archangel was respectful of other spiritual authorities, including the devil. Rather than get into a verbal fight and be denigrating toward the devil, he simply said, that's enough. The Lord rebuke you. Then you come to Jude, verse 10, where the King James Version says, but these, speaking of false leaders and false teachers, but these speak evil of those things which they know not, but what they know naturally as brute beasts, in those things they corrupt themselves. Now, that's where we left off in the last program, and we didn't quite finish this verse, so we're going to begin there again today. But notice in the King James Version, he says, but these speak evil of those things which they know not. The RIV says, but. And by the way, the word but has a footnote because in Greek it is very important. It means but amazingly. Can you imagine it? But the kind of people I'm talking to you about right now speak atrociously and inappropriately. And as we read in footnote 89, these words speak atrociously and inappropriately are from a form of blasphemeo, which means to slander, accuse, speak against, or to speak derogatory words for the purpose of injuring or harming someone's reputation. And this word blasphemeo includes any type of debasing, derogatory, nasty, shameful, ugly speech or behavior intended to humiliate someone or to put someone down. And that is why the RIV interprets it, they speak atrociously and inappropriately, even about things they absolutely do not comprehend or have a clue about. The RIV says do not. This word do not, as we read in footnote 91, is from the word ook, and the word ook describes the most emphatic kind of no, saying emphatically not. They absolutely do not comprehend or have a clue about. And as we read in footnote 92, the words comprehend or have a clue about are from a form of oida. Now listen to this. a common word that means to see, perceive, understand, or comprehend, and it depicts knowledge gained by personal experience or observation. Those Jude was describing were not only demeaning toward authority, but they were also critical and condemning of things they had never seen, comprehended, or personally experienced. Do you see? This is just jam-packed. But then the RIV continues to say, to be honest, they know and operate from natural, low-level instincts. Footnote 93 says, the words natural, low-level instincts are interpreted from a form of physikos, which depicts acting from a base instinct or nearly from the same level as an animal. And that is why then Jude goes on to say, to be honest, they know and operate from natural, low-level instincts and are a lot like animals. That's really what the Greek says. As we read in footnote number 95, the word animals is translated from a form of zoon, which means animals. And it's interesting, this is where we get the word for a zoo. And really there's an inference here that these people do not belong in the pulpit, they belong behind the bars in a zoo. These people need to be caged. They're so wild and they're so brute. But then he goes on to say, to be honest, they know and operate from natural low-level instincts and are a lot like animals that lack intelligence, which explains why their standing in life is so degenerate, depraved, and totally messed up. But notice the RIV translates it, their standing in life, and verse 90, footnote 96 explains the word standing in life are an interpretation of a word which here speaks of something that is sustained over a long period of time or something that has become one's prolonged practice. This really is their standing in life. And Jude writes, it has become degenerate, depraved, and totally corrupt. And footnote 97 explains the words degenerate, depraved, and totally messed up are an interpretation of a word that pictures that which is corrupt, degenerate, depraved, rotten, ruined, or ruinous. The Greek term carries the idea of corrupting something to the degree where it can no longer fulfill its originally designed purpose. We're talking about individuals that were originally called by God. They were called by God, but now they've strayed, they've gotten off track, and now they become so corrupted that in their state, they can no longer fulfill their originally God-given purpose. All of that is in the RIV of Jude, verse 10. But then we move to verse 11, and this is brand new material today. Woe unto them, the King James Version says, for they have gone in the way of Cain and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward and perished in the gainsayings of Korah. Now Jude continues to elaborate about these individuals that have abused their spiritual position. And he says, woe unto them. When you read this in the Greek text, the RIV translates it, I say woe to these people. Footnote 98 explains. The word woe is translated from a word that carries the idea of distress, calamity, and foreboding. In other words, guys, these people do not have a good future. He is warning them. He says, I say woe to these people, the RIV, because they have abandoned what they once held to be true to follow after the same path as Cain. But notice he says to follow after. And footnote 99 explains the words abandon what they once held to be true to follow after are from the word poreomai, a word that here pictures one who has departed or transitioned from a former position to another. And the implication is these individuals did not begin in a wrong place, but they abandoned their former place or position to follow after a new place or position that is very different. So we're talking about individuals that were God called, they started in a right place, but now they veered or they have strayed to follow after. This verse says the same path as Cain. The same path, footnote number 100 explains the word path is the Greek word hodos, which is the same road or the same route or the same pattern as Cain. And then we read in the King James Version, and ran greedily after the error of Balaam for reward. The RIV has it like this: and for the sake of financial gain, they've given themselves fully to the error of Balaam. They've lost their moral bearings and are now completely morally adrift. But notice the RIV says, for the sake of financial gain. Footnote 101 explains the words financial gain are interpreted from mistos, which here describes pay, salary, or financial reward. So they got their eyes on money. And for the sake of financial gain, they've given themselves fully. Footnote 102 here is very important. It says, the words have given themselves fully are an interpretation of a form of ekeo, which depicts something that is gushing forward or spilling over. In other words, they're gushing toward this. They've given themselves fully to the error of Balaam, and they have lost their moral bearings and are now completely morally adrift. And footnote 103 is really important concerning this. It says, the words error have lost their moral bearings and are completely morally adrift are an interpretation of a form of planeo, which means deception and portrays a moral wandering. It pictures a person who's veered from a solid path, and as a result of veering morally, he's now adrift. It was also used in literature to depict an animal that had so lost its way, it could not find its way back home. Hence, it portrays one who has morally lost his bearings. My friends, when you begin to drift, you continue to drift and drift and drift and drift. Those that have embraced error don't stop with one little of error. They go to the next level and the next level and the next level until they lose their bearings completely. And that is what the RIV says here. So far, the RIV of verse 11 says, I say woe to these people because they've abandoned what they once held to be true to follow after the same path of Cain. For the sake of financial gain, they've given themselves fully to the error of Balaam. They've lost their moral bearings and are now completely morally adrift. And then it continues to say, as a result, there is a result to error. There's a result to embracing error. And the RIV says, as a result, they have ruined, devastated, and destroyed themselves. And footnote 104 says, the words ruined, devastated, and destroyed are interpreted from apolumi, which here depicts something ruined, wasted, trashed, devastated, and destroyed. And it's amazing that if you follow the story of those that embrace error or who teach error, they walk from a good place, a solid path, into a lifestyle that totally brings destruction into their lives. And that is what Jude now addresses. But the RIV continues to say their mutinous, rebellious, subversive attitudes and speech are a lot like those that marked Korah. Well, footnote 105 explains. The words mutinous, rebellious, subversive attitudes and speech are interpreted from a form of the word antilogia, a compound of anti and lego. The preposition anti means against, and lego means I say, but compounded to form the word antilogia, it pictures words that are mutinous or rebellious, subversive, and it depicts disrespectful speech. And of course, he likens them to Korah, who rebelled against the authority of Moses and did everything that we're reading in these verses. He spoke ill of authorities. He was disrespectful of Moses' spiritual authority. Wow. But then you come to verse 12. And in verse 12, the King James Version says, these are spots in your feasts of charity when they feast with you, feeding themselves without fear, clouds they are without water, carried about of winds, trees whose fruit withereth, without fruit, twice dead, plucked up by the roots. Now, my friends, that's pretty severe. But wait, there's a lot in this verse that is not completely interpreted. The Greek here is just jam-packed, and we're going to begin now in the RIV. We're going to continue it in the next program. But listen to the full RIV of verse 12, which says, These people are right in your midst, sumptuously feasting at your love feast, blatantly, with no fear. Such people are a lot like dangerous reefs in the sea with the potential to spiritually shipwreck people's lives. Yet, there they are among you, self-focused, tending to their own needs and taking care of themselves. They are like dense clouds filling the sky that look like they carry water. But contrary to the image they give to others about themselves, they are spiritually dry as a desert and completely void of spiritual water. In fact, they're like turbulent winds that bring a lot of destruction in people's lives, and they're hard to nail down because they're constantly on the move. They're like fruit-producing trees that should bear fruit in season, but they have absolutely no fruit to show for themselves. Make no mistake, these people are entirely withered, decayed, and rendered dead like a plant that's been torn at its roots from the soil where it once thrived. That is the RIV of verse 12. And when we come back in the next program, this is where we're going to begin, and I'm going to tell you why the RIV interprets it in this way. My friends, I'm telling you, the book of Jude is just amazing. Hey, we're out of time, but I've got something else to say to you, and then I'll be right back.